after a really weird week or so where uploads have been much slower than I wanted them to be, let's get back in the swing of things with another episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, possibly the best show that I'm currently covering. And we are really creeping up on the end of Book 1. This is the, if I'm not mistaken, the final episode before, I mean, technically the finale is 2 parts, but I kind of consider The Waterbending Master to be part 1 of a 3-part finale. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the last episode prior to that, which is pretty cool. It feels pretty cool. In this episode, the Northern Air Temple, after hearing stories that are supposedly very recent of flying people at the Northern Air Temple, Aang and his friends decide to go check the place out and see if there are any living airbenders there, only to instead discover a steampunk-esque civilization of people led by this inventor guy whose name I never bothered to learn, who have used images and information about the airbenders to devise a society that thrives here in the high-up air temple, and has even used steam power, hot air power, to grant its citizens the ability to fly, very similar to how airbenders fly, in proximity to the temple itself. We even see from a pretty spectacular sequence where Aang has a little race with one of the citizens that they're pretty good at it. The gliders that they use function well. They function on par with Aang's own. And the main kid that we interact with here, Teo, it seems like a genuinely nice person who appreciates the things that he and his people have gained from the airbenders. Even if the modernization of the temple has led to pipes being run through important sacred reliefs on the walls and statues being torn down, and overall the serenity of the temple disappearing, being destroyed. All save for one place, another room like the one at the last air temple we visited, that can supposedly only be opened by airbending, which Teo wants to see inside, but Aang, being someone who has very mixed feelings about this whole situation and is leaning towards actively disliking these people for what they did to one of his homes, refuses to open it, and so that at least one part of the temple will remain as it always has, and Teo understands. Eventually, though, he does agree to open the door and show the kid what's inside, only to discover weapons for the Fire Nation, which means that his father has been making weapons for the Fire Nation, and he does explain why. The Fire Nation would have come for them in force if he hadn't offered them some reason to leave his people alone. So it's not like he's doing this because he's sympathetic to their cause. It's out of survival, which is entirely understandable. But when Aang takes a stand against the Fire Nation representative who comes for the weapons, he and the people living here now have to work together to repel a Fire Nation threat. There's also a B-plot of Sokka working with engineer guy. What's his name? Tell me in the comments. I'm not going to look it up because I don't particularly love the character enough to do that. They're working together to solve various problems that the civilization has, including learning how to scent gas so that you can smell gas leaks and find them, which is a real-life engineering innovation that had to happen for us to reach our current level of technological progress. And one of the problems they managed to solve is how to control the altitude of a hot air balloon using a hatch in the top. And that, coupled with the various gliders, as well as some makeshift drop bombs that they come up with, are enough to repel the Fire Nation. But in the end, their one war balloon crashes and the Fire Nation recovers it, which will eventually lead to the Fire Nation gaining air superiority in later conflicts, completely erasing this one advantage that the rebels have. And I'm not going to dwell a lot on this episode. You may have already noticed I'm kind of blasting my way through it, and that's because I don't really like this one. I like the characters well enough, like the kid, Teo, I like him a lot. His dad's fine, and I like the situations that he gets into, that our heroes get into because of him. You know, I don't really like him that much. But I feel that this episode's actually very flawed. asks a lot of very interesting questions. And I want to make that absolutely clear. Like, here is this sacred place that has a lot of importance to Aang, because it's one of the last vestiges of his people. But no one's using it. So is it really right to say that these people who, their backstory is they were displaced as refugees, is it wrong to tell them they can't use it? And even then, if we agree that it is wrong to tell them that they can't use it, would it be wrong to tell them that they can't enhance it? Are they even enhancing it? Can an argument be made that they're making it worse, even as they increase their technological level? Is it enough that these innovations are being built on observations of airbenders, of their culture? Because in that way, they are honoring the airbenders and their culture, but at the same time, they're destroying reliefs and statues that tell of the airbenders' history. Things that were important to the culture. But then again, until Aang showed up, they thought the culture was dead. And maybe they don't even know how to interpret these things. So it's not like they can write the history down. Or at least we can assume that they don't know how to just write the history down. So it doesn't make sense to keep preserving it when they could improve their quality of life by doing something else. Like, now that Aang's back, it dredges up the question again, but at the time, when it didn't seem that there were any airbenders left, was it wrong to do that? But also, couldn't they have taken a little more care to destroy fewer things that might have some meaning? Is the meaning of the thing enough reason to try to preserve it, even as everything else changes? And in the end, Aang says he's glad that these people are living here. That, more or less, to paraphrase, he's glad that this place is still being used by people who care about it. But, as the last living airbender, if he had told these people to leave, would he have been in the right to do so? And likewise, in response, would they have been in the right to fight him on it? Because I feel like that's a thing that almost happened. All of that, along with seeing Sokka and What's-His-Face work out real engineering innovations in real time, were pretty cool. Those were pretty cool aspects of the episode. Not to mention the moral question of, was it right to bend to the Fire Nation in order to protect your people? Like, I think it was. But I do think that the moment you have another option, you should take it. But that's what they did. So it works out. My main problem with the episode is that almost everything about it is handled very clunkily. Those questions, while interesting, aren't really given much time to breathe. And it really feels like these characters had to have been here, interacting with these people for a very long time. And yet we see no time indicative transitions at all. Like, everything happens at such a fast pace that I would guess they had to have been here at least a couple weeks. But it feels like, from the way the transitions are handled, that they're here maybe 2 days at most. And if that's the case, then Aang went from being staunchly against opening that final room to being willing to open it after like 5 minutes of interacting with these people. And Aang is someone who is very protective of his culture. I just don't believe it would be that easy for him to change. Not to mention that all of the stuff that Sokka and What's-His-Face were doing definitely took time to execute. Like, by the end, they managed to repel the Fire Nation by setting off one of the natural gas leaks that they had literally just come up with a way to identify. When did they implement that means of identifying the leak? Like, there's no time for it. And yet they're able to find the leak by smell. So there must have been some time in there for them to actually do the thing that let them find that leak in the first place. And yet that's never indicated. Never even kind of. Not to mention that the Fire Nation hardware here, they have tanks, for example, that are able to scale the cliffs up to the air temple. They're done at least partially in CGI. And sometimes it looks fine, but other times it just looks terrible. It's very poorly integrated here. And the fact that it's on flat, mostly textureless snow the entire time means that it really stands out. And there's also a lot of inconsistency in the action here. Like, at one point, one aspect that really stood out to me is, like, Sokka throws his boomerang with a rope on it like 50 yards at one point. And he does it just by like kind of flicking his wrist slightly, because the space he's in doesn't have a lot of room for him to move his arm. And rather than animating around that, they just half-ass it. And then there's a scene of Aang taking on the tanks, and at one point he's able to flip them over with a single blast from his airbending, but then later he can't even push them back with similar blasts. It just... The early scene of Aang flying with Teo felt really good. Like, you really get the joy of flight. And then later when we see Katara do the same using one of the gliders of the people living here, you really get a sense that there's this joy in flight. And those sequences were really good because of it, but the later action sequence, the final action sequence of the episode, was just so inconsistent and flat and boring and poorly choreographed. And the same droning track plays across the entire thing. It was a slog to get through. Even if, on paper, giant metal tanks against flying people in gliders should have been really cool. I just don't like it. In the end, I think this is going to be a controversial statement considering that the Great Divide is in the season, I think this is the most uneven episode of the entire first season of the show. It introduces important characters and concepts, but I really think that's the only thing it's good for, is the concept work. The episode itself is very weak. I feel like if they wanted to really do justice to this concept of these people who have effectively appropriated this place, they should have spent an entire arc here, and they just didn't have time to do that. All that said, though, guys, what do you think of the Avatar The Last Airbender episode, the Northern Air Temple, if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel, as well as the newest video I put up, my first ever Pokemon challenge. Watching that would be very helpful too. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.